Today we're going to tackle a really serious question, one that gets a little more real every single day. What happens if the Great Salt Lake, one of the great landmarks of the American West, turns into a source of toxic dust?
For as long as people have lived there, the Great Salt Lake has been this huge stabilizing presence. It was a natural shield, really. It helped regulate the climate, it created this one-of-a-kind habitat for wildlife, and it protected the air quality for everyone living nearby.
But that entire relationship is changing. So we have to ask a pretty tough question. What happens when that shield doesn't just disappear, but gets replaced by an airborne weapon, one that's aimed right at the very people it used to protect?
To really get a handle on a threat, first we have to understand why the shield is failing in the first place. And the reason the lake is shrinking, well, it's not some big secret. It really just comes down to simple math.
The problem is pretty straightforward. The rivers that have fed this lake for thousands of years are being diverted before they can even get there. As you can see, the vast majority of that water, the biggest slice, goes to agriculture. The rest is split between supporting a growing population and local industries.
So the bottom line is this. We're not talking about a small leak here. A huge chunk of the water that should be keeping the lake alive is being siphoned off for human use. The lake is quite literally being starved.
But here's the real kicker. The crisis isn't just about the missing water. It's about what's been slowly building up at the bottom of the lake for more than a century, stuff that's now being exposed to the open air for the very first time. The real problem is what was left behind.
For decades, the lake basically acted like a giant sink. Anything and everything that flowed downstream ended up right here. That includes naturally occurring things like arsenic, but also a nasty cocktail of heavy metals from old mining operations, runoff from industrial plants, and all the pesticides used in modern farming.
Let's just zoom in on one of those for a second. Arsenic. It's a heavy metal, and it is extremely toxic to people. And we're not talking about a minor irritant. Exposure is directly tied to multiple kinds of cancer and serious neurological damage. And right now, tons of it is just sitting there in the dry, exposed lakebed.
So, how does this poison, which was hidden for so long, suddenly become an active threat? Well, as long as it was locked away under all that water, the contaminants were more or less harmless. But now, a very simple, very natural process is about to turn them into a direct airborne danger.
The whole process is disturbingly simple. Step 1, the water recedes, exposing the lakebed. Step 2, those contaminated sediments dry out and turn into a fine, light powder. Step 3, strong winds come along and just pick those toxic particles up into the air. And finally, Step 4, dust storms carry that poison directly over populated areas.
And that brings us to the impact. The fallout from these toxic dust storms isn't some far-off, hypothetical guess. These are predictable, measurable consequences for public health and for the entire ecosystem.
The direct cost to people is severe. Just an increase in airborne dust alone leads to spikes in things like asthma. But when that dust is laced with heavy metals like arsenic, the result is a documented increase in cancer rates and neurological damage.
And the fallout goes way beyond human health. The lake's unique ecosystem, which supports huge populations of wildlife, it just collapses. It completely disrupts one of the most important bird migration routes in all of North America, and of course, it causes huge economic damage to local tourism and industry.
This isn't just a forecast. We have a crystal clear historical example of this exact kind of disaster. We have watched this movie before.
Over in Central Asia, the Aral Sea used to be the 4th largest lake on the planet. The parallels to the Great Salt Lake are just chilling. The cause was identical, massive water diversion for farming. The hidden threat was identical, a toxic lakebed. And the outcome? A massive public health crisis. The story is exactly the same. The scientific community is unanimous on what happened there. They concluded that the dust storms from the drying Aral Sea created, and I'm quoting here, one of the worst environmental health disasters of the 20th century. That is the playbook we are currently following.
So this all leads us to the final, unavoidable point. This isn't a problem for some future generation to figure out. The choices we make right now are what will determine the outcome, because the window to actually do something about it is closing fast.
Just look at this timeline. Today, right now, that window for meaningful action is still open. But in just 5 years, scientists are warning that a lot of the ecological damage could become permanent, irreversible. And within 10 years, we could be looking at a totally new reality where frequent toxic dust storms are just a normal part of life.
But this future isn't set in stone.
The solutions are actually well known. We're talking about fundamental changes to water policy, aggressive conservation efforts, and some large-scale interventions. The problem isn't that we lack the science. The real challenge is finding the political will to act.
And so we're left with this one final question. The Great Salt Lake is drying. That's a fact. The only choice left is what will rise in its place. Will it be a revived, healthy ecosystem, or a toxic desert that poisons the air for generations to come?